You guys realize that we are almost halfway through the year? Has that dawned on y'all? I mean, it was just like in the last week or so, I realized that July is almost here. And when we hit July, 2018 is halfway done. Am I getting old or something? Because it just seems like these years go faster and faster. I mention that to you because with the coming of July, well, that's going to mean some changes for us in our focus of study this year. On the first Sunday in July, we'll change our theme from talking about building relationships with the family of God to building bridges to the lost. You do see how those two are connected, right? Part of the work that we do together, in fact, just one of the most important things as a church family we do together is reach out to lost people. And so beginning in July, we're going to refocus ourselves on that critical work. In fact, toward the end of the summer, as we move into September, we're going to start our fall focus a little early in the fall. The month of September, we're going to talk about preaching the gospel in the 21st century. We've invited some guest speakers. It'll be a great month of study, but that's what's coming up, this focus on evangelism as we hit the halfway mark through the year. And interestingly, have you been doing your Bible reading? So you know this week we're going to be reading what? Luke. Oh, I heard the answer. That's great, Wesley. That means they're reading. Luke chapter 24, which also means we're right at the end, right? And so beginning in July, we'll also change our Bible reading to the book of Acts. Isn't it amazing how that works? We go from talking about the family of God to talking about evangelism right about the time we're transitioning to the book of Acts. And I guess there's something in Acts about reaching lost people, right? I mean, it is the book of conversions in the New Testament. So that timing works perfectly. As we jump into Acts, we're going to start talking about reaching lost people. So that's all coming up for us. Let me mention one other thing to you. On that first Sunday in July, we're going to be doing a pulpit swap with the Kleinwood Church. I'm going over to help out with their young people that weekend, and Brent Moody, one of their preachers, who has never been here with us, he's going to come over and he'll teach here that Sunday morning. He's an excellent Bible student. I know you'll be really excited to sit at his feet and hear what he has to say. So we got a lot of stuff coming up as we reach this halfway mark and begin to transition to the second part of the year. But before we get to that, we've got some other stuff going on here, right? So Friday is the special study for teenagers. Y'all have that marked in your schedule, right? I tell you, folks, we do this every year and we talk about a lot of important stuff. I cannot emphasize to you how important this study is. Our kids are making their way through a corrupt world. Do y'all believe that? And perhaps one of the greatest challenges they face as young disciples is keeping themselves pure and holy in the midst of a corrupt world. I will tell you why we're talking about this. I probably already said it, but last year, parents asked us to talk about this. Our kids need to be pure in their dating relationships. And listen, they're struggling with internet pornography and that grave danger. We need someone to talk about that. We need some good teaching about that. So that's what we're doing this year. Got some great speakers coming. You guys remember Caleb Churchill, don't you? He was with us a few weeks ago, a few years ago, did a super job. And then Ben Hall, who was with us last year, he'll be back. And we've got a couple of teachers working this year because we're going to break these groups up by age so the discussion will be appropriate. You're not going to have some college guy talking with your fifth grader about pornography, okay? We're going to break that up so it'll be age appropriate. Sometimes we'll have the girls and the guys broken up, have some small group sessions going on. It's going to be a great weekend of study. And listen, we've invited folks from everywhere to come. And I hope they do. But you know primarily why we do this. This is for our kids. Because we want them to be holy in a corrupt world. So moms and dads, will you help us out? We begin Friday night at 7 o'clock, and we need your kids to be here. And Grandma, will you remind your kids that they need to get their kids here on Friday? Because you can just say everything, right? Bless your heart and take off, whatever you need to say. Help us out. We really want our kids to be here for this special study. Well, I want to come back to this theme what we're wrapping up, because it occurred to me as I started thinking about this transition we're going through, that this will be the last Sunday that I have a chance to say something about this theme we've been working since April: building relationships in the family of God. And if you look at those three subjects at the top, we've hit on all three of those, right? And all of them pertain to this thing that we're trying to do together. There's a relationship that needs to exist among us. We need to be brothers and sisters. We need to be a family. That's a part of this. And yet we come together for the purpose of doing a great work. And we've talked about that too. The work that we have to do together, and how everyone has a part in that work. You are a member of the body. You have a function. We are part of God's family. Going back to the Nehemiah illustration, we all have a spot on the wall where we need to be building. And so I just wondered, as we're wrapping all of that up, what would I say to you about that today? My last chance to talk about it. And so I settled on two words that I found at the end of the book we're doing in our summer series, right at the end of 1 Corinthians. Grab your Bible, go there. I'm headed to chapter 15. Right at the end of chapter 15, in this book we're doing in our summer series and talking about building relationships in the family of God, I gravitated toward these words in verse 58, where Paul gives this admonition. Listen to what he said. He said, "Be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord." And I thought about those two words right at the start of that. I thought about these words, always abounding. Always abounding in the work of the Lord. I think we need to think about those two words and what they say to me and you about this work we do together. So I want to begin by talking about the second word first. Let's talk about the word abounding and what it means to abound in the work of the Lord. So first thing I did is I started trying to define this word and look at how it's used in the Bible, and I discovered something. Head over to Ephesians with me for just a moment. In Ephesians chapter 1, I discovered that the same word translated here, abounding, is also used by the Holy Spirit in Ephesians 1. Now, if you know the book of Ephesians, you know that Paul will begin by describing what God has done for us in Jesus Christ, the way that we have been blessed by God through Christ. And if you get down to verse 7, in verse 7 he says this: in him, talking about Christ, in him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses, according to the riches of his grace, which he lavished on us. Do you see that in verse 8? It says God's grace was lavished on us. That word lavished, guess what? In the original language, it's our word abounding. Same word is used in both places. So let's stop and think about this idea of God lavishing his grace on us. I began to try to work on that a little bit, and I found in the marginal reading of one of the Bibles where it explains that word lavish with this phrase. It means God made abundant toward us. God made abundant. Do you get that? Brothers and sisters, when God poured out his grace for me and you, he poured it out abundantly. It was overflowing. It covered everything that we needed. Do you see that idea? God's grace was poured out to take care of everything that I needed so that I could be saved. That's how his grace was poured out. And so Paul would come back to Corinthians and he would write in 15 and verse 58, say that I want you in that way to abound in the work of the Lord. He's using the same word that he uses to describe the pouring out of God's grace to describe how we ought to do our thing for the Lord. Doesn't that make sense? This is what God did for me. This is how God did it for me. And this is how we ought to do our thing for him. Let me just tell you, brothers and sisters, kingdom labors should never be merely an idle curiosity. Let me say this carefully. Kingdom labors should never be merely some idle curiosity that we dabble in a little bit on Sunday. Paul says that we need to abound in the work of the Lord. Can I say a couple of things to you about that? What does it mean to abound in the work of the Lord? I think attached to that meaning certainly is the idea of doing this with passion and zeal. Do you see that? In fact, in one of the translations, they rendered the phrase this way: always give yourself fully to the work of the Lord. I like that. In Romans 12 and verse 11, Paul would say when we do the work of the Lord, we need to do it with zeal. Do you know what the word zeal means? It means to be hot, bubbling over, on fire for the Lord. That's how we do his work. You ever describe someone as being on fire for the Lord? Wesley, I bet you've known of some new convert. About the time you had him out of the water from baptism, they're off running telling someone else about Jesus, right? What do we say about that guy? He's just been converted and he's running around trying to convert everybody else. We say what? He's on fire for the Lord, right? And sometimes I think tragically what we do is we try to calm those people down. You realize, brothers and sisters, that God calls upon all of us to have that kind of fiery passion about this thing that we do for him. Abounding in the work of the Lord carries this idea of being passionate and zealous. And this, I think this is part of it too. I think it means that we are fully invested in the work of the Lord. Always give yourselves fully. That's how that translation read. Can we dig down there just a little bit? I think what that means is that the work of God deserves our time and our energy and our thoughts and our resources. Listen, I don't give myself to my career, or I should. I don't give myself to the following of my favorite sports team. Ooh, that one hit close to home. I don't give myself to some hobby or some interest or to my travels. I give myself to God and to his word. Someone says, David, what are you saying? Should we all quit our job and just hit the street preaching everywhere? I wouldn't recommend that at all. I just think as we go about doing whatever we do at school, or when we go to work, or when we take care of our family, as we go about our daily routine, that the highest priority, our greatest concern, is not with career or school or academics or hobbies. It's with the cause into which I'm invested. It's advancing his cause. It's doing his work. That's the thing that consumes me all the time. The fact that you go to a job every day is an advantage. You're surrounded by a whole lot of people who need a whole lot of work. They need to know Jesus. You know, sometimes preachers are at the greatest disadvantage when it comes to evangelism. Ever thought about that? You know who I see all day long? Saved people. You know who you see all day long? Lost people. You have a better advantage in all of that than I do. And so I don't want you to quit your job. I want you to go to work on your job. Not just doing what you do for your company. With something even more important. Trying to help those people around us find Jesus. I reconnected with an old friend of mine several years ago through social media, probably Facebook or something, I don't remember. But we reconnected with each other, and I asked him those questions that we ask when we reconnect with old friends, right? I said, so what are you doing with yourself these days? And this is how he wrote back. He said, well, my work is to shepherd this congregation of God's people that I'm part of. And he says, I support myself in that work by selling computer software. And I read that and I thought, that guy's got it. He understands. My work is the work of God. And along the way, I need to eat. And so I have a job. That's a guy, brothers and sisters, who is all in. He is fully invested. And listen, investing in the cause is the thing to be fully invested in. You know, Paul would begin this chapter back in 1 Corinthians 15. You know where he starts? He starts by saying, if Christ is not raised, your faith is worthless. And that's true. Everything hinges on the historical fact that Jesus rose from the dead. And after making that point, he goes on to say at the end of this letter, because Jesus rose from the dead, your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Do you see that? What we do for the Lord, folks, it doesn't just matter. It is the only thing that we do that matters. Can I be clear about that? It is the only thing that we do that matters. You guys that work for ExxonMobil, thank you. I'm glad we have gasoline, but your work doesn't matter. And those of you who go to the hospital and to labor to make sick people well, thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. My brother-in-law is the gracious benefactor of good hospital workers, doctors and nurses, but your work doesn't matter. You know how many patients doctors lose? 100%. Everyone, right? And you take any labor that pertains to this world. I don't care what it is. If you're a plumber fixing someone's toilets, or if you're president of the United States. In the end, the things that we do that pertain to this earth don't matter. It is only our labors in the Lord that matter. Do you see that? That's Solomon's point in Ecclesiastes. Over and over again, he talks about vanity when he's describing the things we do here and now. It is what we do for the Lord and his kingdom. It's the stuff of eternity. It's the stuff that has genuine meaning and significance. It's the labor that you can say is not in vain. And so if we're going to invest fully in anything, brothers and sisters, it ought to be in this. And then I would add thirdly, that we need to invest fully in this. We need to abound in the work of the Lord because God deserves nothing less than that. Let me say that again. God deserves nothing less than a passionate, full investment of his people. Paul says that God lavished his grace on us in Ephesians. Question. What is the appropriate response of his people to that? I think he says it right there. I lavished my grace on you, now you abound in my work. Let me illustrate it this way. Have you ever exchanged gifts with someone? And when everything was open, what you got them was not nearly as good as what they got you? You ever had that moment? Like, guys, it's when you discovered on the way home from work that it was your anniversary. And so you swung by Walgreens to pick up something for your wife, right? And guys, if you're thinking, yeah, I got you, go ahead, you're already in trouble. You realize that, right? And so you get home with this really impressive purchase from Walgreens, and she's got a box that she purchased months ago thinking about the anniversary. So you were already in trouble. And when you open up, it is this beautiful, expensive watch that you've been wanting for years. And she got it for you. And in your box, it's that thing from Walgreens. How you feeling? It ain't gonna work out so good, is it? So let me be clear about something. There is not anything that we can do that compares with God's gift for us, right? I understand that. I'm not saying that somehow we can give something back that would be comparable. All I'm saying is that when we start giving back, shouldn't we be thinking about the gift and how valuable and how significant it is? I think that what we do for the Lord is tied in to our sense of gratitude and indebtedness. I give back to him. I abound in his work because I am overwhelmed with his grace that has been lavishly poured out on me. Does that make sense? There's indebtedness and gratitude tied in to the way that we do our thing for the Lord. So that we don't miss the point, and at the risk of really getting close to the line here. Can we think about our response when someone stands up here and goes back again and talks about how we need to get out and reach lost people? Do you ever hear that and just think, I am so tired of those constant reminders to teach the lost? You ever kind of wrinkle up your nose at that reminder? I want you to think about what that says to the giver of the gift. Or when someone comes to you and says, we're needing a teacher for a class. We really need you to come help us teach a class. And listen, I'm not hunting any teachers right now. I have no agenda, okay? But someone comes to you and asks you, we really need a teacher for the class. And my attitude is, oh, come on. I am so busy. Me again? I want you to think about what that Spirit says to the giver of the gift. What is our attitude toward the work God calls us to do? And when you hear a reminder at the end of the service, hey, by the way, we're going to be gathering again this evening. Y'all do realize that, right? We have a service here that starts at 5 o'clock. Not 5:10. Thank you, Leonard. Not 5:10. It starts at 5 o'clock. We're going to be back here worshiping God. And you really need to be back for that. And I'm just kind of ambivalent. Yeah, whatever. I got stuff this afternoon. Will you think about what that says to the giver of the gift? What does that communicate about our sense of debt and our sense of gratitude? For people who have had the grace of God lavished on them, we ought to abound in His work. In fact, let's go to our second word, because He doesn't just say to be abounding in the work of the Lord. He says always abound in the work of the Lord. And you're sitting there thinking, surely David is not going to take time to define the word always for us. Listen, that's not lost on me. I thought about that. What do you say about always? It means always. Yeah, that's what I thought too. As together we stand and sing, we'll just go home now. But I do think we need to be reminded that our abounding is to be always. I say that because I think it's easy to make excuses, isn't it? To look at where we are in life and our circumstances, especially when the work is hard and I've got things that are distracting me. It's easy to make excuses. You do realize that no matter where you are in life, there are always excuses to be made and always opportunities. No matter whether you are, if you're in high school just trying to survive, or in college carrying a weight of a burden of academic finals and those kind of things, or if you're just starting out in life, newly married, trying to build a career, or if you're in the middle of raising kids, God bless you. Or if you're the empty nester, or Max, whatever it is that comes after that, I'm not sure. You could tell us about that. But whatever stage of life you find yourself in, there are always excuses. There's a reason why it's hard to do God's work now. And there's an opportunity. I don't care where you are in life, at what stage. There's also unique opportunities to work for the Lord that you won't have later on. And so what's the word? He said, always abound in the work of the Lord. No matter where you are, no matter what's going on in life, you need to abound in His work. And listen, we got people in this church family who do that. We've got young people carrying a heavy academic load and lots of activities who are here for Bible class. They're talking to their friends about Jesus. Even at this stage in their life, they're abounding in the work of the Lord. And we've got young mothers in the church building, keeping up with a bunch of kids and still taking the time to come up here and invest heavily in our Bible class program. And we've got men with demanding careers and lots of responsibilities, work-wise and family-wise, who still give time to this church family to serve it in more ways than I can even begin to know. And what we need to do is personally, individually make sure that can be said of me. That in whatever stage of life I am abounding in His Word. That got me thinking about the Corinthians. Because remember, he said this to them, and I wondered, what might they have to deal with that made it difficult for them to do the work of God? What about this rather scandalous background that many of them came from? We talked about that in our summer series. You remember in chapter 6, down in verse 9? This is 1 Corinthians 6, verse 9. He talked about how some of them had been fornicators, idolaters, adulterers, effeminate, homosexual, thieves, covetous, drunkards, revilers, swindlers. He says in verse 11, such were some of you. There were people at Corinth that had a past, an ugly past. Some of us do too. And we could let it be a liability. What did Jesus say to these people? What did he say to these people with a past? He said, abound in the work of the Lord. In fact, can I just suggest that sometimes the best way to deal with your ugly past is to get on and do something beautiful in your future? Invest yourself in the work of God. Do something with your life that really matters. Boy, it's a great way to get you back beyond the past that you'd like to forget. Corinthians knew about that. They had a background. Listen, they also had a culture problem. We've talked about that at Corinth. The name of the city was synonymous with immorality. Corinth was an exceedingly wicked city. And there you have this group of disciples trying to serve the Lord, do the work of the Lord in this terrible city. How easy would it have been for the Corinthians to say, nobody wants to hear the gospel here. We're at Corinth, man. We need to build a wall and put up guards, not get out into the community. What did Paul tell them to do? In that awful place, abound in the work of the Lord. So listen, next time you're tempted to think that there just isn't a lot that can be done for God in this country and this culture, fold your hands and thank him you weren't in Corinth. I would remind you folks that as our culture gets deeper and deeper into sin, the result of that is these people are going to suffer the consequences of the evil life that they're living. They're going to hit the bottom. And you know what happens when people hit the bottom, right? A lot of them start looking up. I want to suggest to this church family that we will have more and more opportunities. The more depraved our culture becomes, the more opportunity to rescue this people that get down into the mire of sin and destroy their lives. They get to the place where they realize how pointless that is. They're suffering in their sins and they're looking for an answer. And who knows the answer? We do. It's Jesus Christ. We need to see the opportunities in our corrupt culture. And then, as I was thinking about the Corinthians, I also thought about the circumstances in that church. Listen, the sad thing about Corinth is they weren't even united together in this effort to reach their community. This church was a mess. He begins with that in chapter 1 and verse 11. He talks about the divisions among them. And then he gets to chapter 3 and he's talking about how immature that they all are. They're thinking like worldly people and not like people who have the mind of Christ. As if that wasn't bad enough, you get to chapter 5 and there's this ugly case of immorality that's being tolerated in the church. And while that's going on, they're dragging each other into court and sue each other. They're all messed up, as we learned in class today, about divorce and remarriage, or even abusing their spiritual gifts. That church was a mess. And so you think Paul's message to them would be, don't even think about the city. You guys need to get your act together first. And yet that isn't what he does. Yeah, they needed to get their act together. He says a whole lot about the mess in the church there and how they needed to get that fixed. But he also said when he got to the end of the letter, you people always abound in the work of the Lord. In fact, I would suggest, brothers and sisters, that sometimes the best way to get past a church mess is to get busy doing the work of the Lord. I think what messes up churches is people get too inwardly focused. We're just thinking too much about us and problems and issues and struggles among brethren, where a lot of that would just kind of find its own solution if our minds were focused on the work of God and reaching out to this community full of lost people who need the gospel. A lot of times that's the solution to the problem. Just get busy doing the work of the Lord. He says always abound. So even if you find yourself someday in a church that's just a big fat mess, you know what you need to do? Abound in the work of the Lord. I think there are two reasons that is so critical. Number one, our work is the most important work. We've already said that. It's about helping people get to heaven. And it is an urgent. because people are dying. And dying when they don't expect it. And there is an urgent need to reach those people with the gospel and to bring them to Jesus. And so as people called to be his servants, we need to hear those words that he spoke to the Corinthians so long ago. Our work is critical, our work is urgent, and for that reason we must always abound. In fact, it may be that someone sitting in this crowd needs to let God work in your life because you're not ready. You haven't had his grace lavished on you. Never become his child. He wants to do that. He wants you to be rescued this morning. He wants to get rid of that awful burden that you're carrying. He wants to form you in the image of his Son and send you out to do his work. But it begins with your choice to serve him. Do you need to do that? Heaven is appealing right now for you to respond. The song that we will sing will encourage you. Will you make the choice to be his child? You need to come to him. Make your way down to the front right now while we stand, while we sing.